Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I've been thinking about a couple of things that I thought I would talk about today. They're both, strangely enough, connected, though they have to do with very different occasions. One of them is about a wedding ceremony that I officiated at about a week ago. And the other one is an ongoing series of discussions that I've been having with a couple of people in this Sangha who are interested in taking tokudo. And whenever anybody takes tokudo in this culture, the question always arises as to what does it mean to leave home? How is that manifested? So I want to talk about both these things. It's interesting, there's an interesting symmetry between them, I see, because on the one hand, marriage is creating a household, and leaving home is leaving a household. Or at least that's what many people interpret that to mean. So, first let me talk about the wedding. I have developed over a period of time a wedding ceremony that I use in all of these civil weddings. The wedding that I officiated at a week ago was not a Buddhist wedding. It had nothing to do with Buddhism. None of the participants were Buddhist or even knew what Buddhism is.
Yeah.
So it was a very secular occasion, and it was a Spanish wedding. It was between the wife, the bride was a Mexican citizen, and the groom was a Hispanic butcher in this town, which is how I knew him. He's my butcher.
He ain't heavy, he's my butcher.
He's my butcher.
So, one of the things, the wedding ceremony that I use is not a simple ceremony because it has a lot of different vows that I speak and require assent to. But it's very Buddhist in intention, I think. Because let me read to you. In the case that by accident someday I actually marry some Buddhists, this is what I would say. Buddhism is a path of transformation of one's inner potential. It is a path dedicated to serving others, thereby helping both them and ourselves to awaken to our potential. Marriage is a vehicle to practice serving others. Each partner serves the other, and in this sense, marriage is a practice ground. We need people. We need each other in order to practice compassion. And then the vows that I pronounce are, do you pledge to help each other develop your hearts and minds, grow in compassion? Recognizing that life will not always be smooth and that your minds and emotions will sometimes get stuck in negativity, do you pledge to see these circumstances as a challenge? Do you pledge to avoid becoming narrow, closed, or opinionated? Understanding that we, just as we are a mystery to ourselves, each other person is also a mystery to us. Now, that's a very Buddhist thing to say, and it's a very important thing to say. And this is the part that I've been thinking about. Because, you know, when I perform Daishin downstairs, every Daishin is, in effect, a kind of transmission. Every exchange between a teacher and a student is a kind of transmission. And it should be regarded as such. One way in which I think about this is to tell myself that every exchange between a teacher and a student is an exchange between two unknowns. You know, the teacher is unknown and the student is unknown. And just as, you know, I have that little pendant I very often wear that says, you know,
Not known.
Not knowing.
not knowing is most intimate. And I think that this is true of any intimate relationship. Just as we say that not knowing is most intimate, we can say that anything that's intimate is unknown. And that's certainly the case in our relationships with each other. You know, all the important relationships that we have, whether they be spousal or close friends or sangha buds or however it is, you know, it's all a question of intimacy, and it's all a question of being in a state of not knowing. And not knowing is something that needs to be preserved in a relationship. I sometimes think that that after you've been married 15 or 20 years, that the spark seems to go out of the relationship for a lot of people. And I think it can be revived. I think it can be maintained by preserving the mystery of that relationship, by retaining the fact that our spouse is unknown. I have a problem with making a statement like that, because I've recently been subjected to an essay that appeared in Tricycle magazine that I really objected to. And I'll tell you why I objected to it. It was an article that was about, it talked about a variety of different things, but one of the things that it talked about is the importance of being idle. And the guy, I think his name was Clark Taylor, was trying to make the point that, you know, very important developments often come out of our idleness. Idleness is necessary because it's regenerative, and it often leads to unexpected discoveries and advances. You know, I don't know if you remember or not, but when Jonah Lehrer wrote his now disgraced book on creativity, he opened that book with a chapter on Bob Dylan, who, after enjoying a certain amount of success and being on a couple of tours, reached a point of being burned out. And he simply got up and left New York City and went, I think it was to Pennsylvania or someplace, to live in a cabin somewhere. And after 2 or 3 months of this, he kept a journal while he was doing this. And he began to spend all of his time every day writing, and came up with a lot of really important songs that we've all heard many times. And he completely had rethought his career and what he was doing. Well, that's fine. That's fine. What made me angry about this article was the fact that I often wonder if you make a statement like that, the extent that you are interfering, it's about the only way I can put it, that you're interfering in somebody else's life. My reaction when I read this thing about idleness was, my first reaction was, get your hands off my laziness. You know? I like to be lazy. And I don't want to have to think that I have to be lazy so that I can be productive. I mean, that really kills the whole deal, doesn't it? I said, also you can take your hands off my guilt. Because I like to be lazy and I like to feel guilty about it. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
There is so much of our lives these days. I mean, people didn't have to think about this, 50 years ago. Nobody was trying to control each other. And today, it's quite different. We get advice about all sorts of different kinds of stuff. But it also raises the issue of, if you make somebody aware that while they're doing this other thing happens, are you really ruining the whole experience? You see? And is that important or not? So, it was with great reluctance that I make an observation like, that the relationship between a teacher and a student is between two unknowns. See? This is a question that interests me deeply because it's all about the role of the observer. It's also about the role of bearing witness, which we talk about quite a bit in this practice. Because observing something, just as in quantum mechanics, observing something, you change it.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Mm-hmm.
I get this from Alistair McIntyre, actually. Alistair McIntyre is a man, he's a Scotsman, who has become quite well known for the books that he has written, primarily in the area of ethics. And, he taught a number of seminars when I was in graduate school. He was the head of my department. And on the subject of the observer, and how the observer interferes or perhaps changes, what is being observed. And it has also become a very sexy subject in the area of theoretical physics. Because a lot of physicists are beginning to understand that this universe in which we find ourselves is very much determined by the observer, not just in quantum mechanics, but in cosmology. And there are some people, like I think the most famous of these is John Wheeler, who helped found the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies, and who was Einstein's best bud. He later in life came to believe that consciousness which after all is what observation is, consciousness may have an extremely important role to play in how this universe was generated in the first place. It's pretty heavy stuff. You know, it's interesting. It's interesting that, you know, we're going through a period of materialism right now. We want to reduce everything to atoms and molecules. This happens cyclically in the history of science. You know, having studied this, I understand that it shows up about every 50 years or so. And we're going through a period right now when everybody's interested in a clockwork universe in which no free will is said to exist, among other things. But that view is being most stridently defended by biologists and psychologists and people on that side of the scientific laboratory, whereas very few physicists are actually promoting it, even though the theory is all about physics. They seem to be much more mystical than the other guys. Okay, let me get back on track. The Buddha talked about leaving home, that monks, monastics should in some sense leave home. And we have maintained a tradition of home leaving in talking about receiving tokudo. But what does it mean? And it is not an easy thing to explain, because there was enough room in the Buddhist culture to be able to actually leave home. All you had to do was get 2 alms bowls and a threadbare robe, and you got it. You can go out and you can live off the land, which is exactly how the Buddha lived for 40 years. Even longer than that, probably 50. It has a number of advantages. One advantage is that you no longer have to put up with being a householder or being a job holder or being in a relationship. But the bad news is that you no longer have to put up with being a householder or being a job holder or having a relationship. And the reason I say that is because of what I said about the marriage ceremony, in the introduction to the marriage ceremony, in which I said that marriage is a practice ground. Look, we're all pioneers in this business of Zen Buddhism in America. We are all creating our own path. That is a place of great freedom, and it is also a place of heavy responsibility and fear. In this culture, at this time, it is extremely hard to leave home in the same sense that the Buddha meant it. But leaving home is nonetheless an important part of receiving tokudo. And what everybody who receives tokudo has to consider is what that means for themselves. Because we don't have any rules about it. We don't have a monastery where you can spend the rest of your life. Well, there may be one or two places in this country where that is practiced, but not in general by any means. The primary difficulty that you have to face is how to maintain your relationships and your responsibilities, and at the same time find enough space in which you can expand your mind and find ease in zazen. And the time to teach yourself to be a more compassionate and a more caring, unknown human being. You know, there's an old Chinese saying that the real hermits are to be found in the city. And that's very true. That's certainly the case in this culture. Because as one who has tried to leave home in the traditional sense, it's impossible in this culture. This culture infuses every aspect of our lives, and I am certainly a representative of that. I cannot do without an automobile. I live too far out of town. I have to be able to drive out. I can no longer walk up to the grocery store. I've got to have some sort of mechanization to do it. You know, we are tied to our lives by contracts with the cable companies, the utility companies, the insurance companies, the medical providers, all of these things. How do we escape them? Well, the Buddha should have been so lucky, you know, because all of these things provide us with an avenue to practice. Every teacher takes a different attitude towards the people he gives tokudo to. I've found this to be the case within the White Plymouth Sangha. Everybody looks at it a little bit differently and has a little bit different model of what is expected. I don't have a big agenda. I don't try to have that many rules about what it means to be a monk. I do say in a general way that it is a reordering of priorities. Because I think a monk must be dedicated to the preservation and the transmission of this practice. Because it's the only way that it's going to continue to exist. I think it is very true that lay practices do not have a longevity of any significance. The only way that you can preserve the practice is to have people who have expressed a definite commitment to their preservation and to their maintenance. And how that happens, I think everybody is going to have to do it differently. I mean, I recognize the fact that I myself am extremely privileged and have been so for a very long time. because I sort of seem to manage and slip and slide through life without having to, you know, make myself too unhappy. I don't know what I would do if I were that butcher that I married the other day. That would be difficult. So anyway, these are some of the things that I've been thinking about this week. I thank you very much for my acting out on all this.